Today's episode is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right below this video. All right, so yesterday was day one of the Democratic National Convention. I did a live stream of the entire thing. I was commenting, I was reading viewer comments as it was all going on. And I don't know how else to start other than to say it really wasn't very good. Now, I'll talk about what expectations are and how it compares to expectations and to what we would expect from Trump. And I'm going to contextualize it, but there's no way that I could come to you today and say, I'm so inspired and invigorated and energized by what we saw yesterday. I sent some early tweets like during the first half hour, which were really quite negative. I said, first off, quote, I could have done without the prayer to Jesus to kick off the DNC. Not sure about anybody else. And I get that everybody does it and Joe Biden's Catholic and there's still a pretense about religion in the Democratic Party. And it's not just necessarily a pretense. There are religious people as well, and that's fine. They do the Pledge of Allegiance. Like, it all just smelled at this point like Republican light, which maybe is the goal and arguably is still a big part of the centrist elements of the Democratic Party. So I'm not acting surprised by that. I'm just saying it didn't really resonate with me. Then sort of about 22 minutes in fact, I said, someone please talk me off the ledge. I want to win. And the first 22 minutes of this DNC, I'm scared. Can someone tell me how great this is or something? But, then it did start to improve. And maybe my view is skewed by the fact that I just hate cliche packaged politics. And that's exactly what the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, is designed to be. It's designed to be a package culminating with the nomination of, in this case, Joe Biden in 2016, 2012, different people, to get to the election. And it's a package, and especially when you've got coronavirus. So it's not just the idea of packaging up a candidate and a platform, but it is quite literally a video package that has been pre-produced in combination with live segments. You have no crowd energy. It might be just as bad with the Republican National Convention, and this may be just what it is, but it felt very low energy, and, they'd have an actual okay speech, and then they'd cut to music or some other kind of interlude that didn't make sense and took energy away. But I want to try to really see this as not my reaction. Maybe this is the right thing. Like, they don't need to convince me. I'm already voting for Joe Biden. And I actually don't even understand being undecided at this point. And so maybe this is about a very sort of polished, inoffensive package meant to appeal to the few people that might actually be unsure about who to vote for. Like, I don't know is the point. But given the opportunity for Democrats to do something, knowing Republicans will also have an opportunity to do the same thing next week, I'd rather have the better convention than the worst one, no matter how much it really matters in the end. Now, it did keep improving during the first 2 hours, during the 2 hours of the first day. I thought the best parts of the evening were a woman named Kristen Urquiza, whose father died of coronavirus after voting for Donald Trump. She spoke really well and authentically, and a lot of the stuff felt inauthentic. She was really good. And then from the big names, listen, Bernie was excellent. Bernie is always just so clear and precise with his message and the stakes. And I liked that Bernie spoke specifically to his supporters from both 2016 and 2020 and talked about the importance of voting for Joe Biden this time around because of the existential threat that is Donald Trump. Let's look at like a minute of that.
My friends, I say to you, to everyone who supported other candidates in the primary, and to those who may have voted for Donald Trump in the last election, the future of our democracy is at stake. The future of our economy is at stake. The future of our planet is at stake. We must come together, defeat Donald Trump, and elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as our next president and vice president. My friends, the price of failure is just too great to imagine. Thank you.
So really nice job by Bernie Sanders. Beautiful aesthetics, by the way, also, if you were watching. Bernie came to us from Burlington, Vermont with the nice wood pile in the background. I mean, just very, very aesthetically pleasing as well. I'm half kidding. I mean, it was cool. I don't actually care about that, but seeing the wood pile was nice. And then Michelle Obama was really very good. She closed off the night. I thought maybe she went a bit too long, which I was fine with, but I could see from people in the chat that some were starting to sort of tune out a little bit. But I thought she was excellent, fantastic speaker. And again, check out this clip from Michelle Obama going into this idea of, does my vote even matter? Michelle Obama making the case very strongly that yes, it does.
I've said before, being president doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are. Well, a presidential election can reveal who we are too. And 4 years ago, too many people chose to believe that their votes didn't matter. Maybe they were fed up. Maybe they thought the outcome wouldn't be close. Maybe the barriers felt too steep, whatever the reason. In the end, those choices sent someone to the Oval Office who lost the national popular vote by nearly 3 million votes. In one of the states that determined the outcome, the winning margin averaged out to just 2 votes per precinct. 2 votes.
She took that head on really, really well. So I think maybe what I needed was like an attitudinal adjustment. How should we be thinking about this? Does it matter? As I've said before, I don't need conventions this year. I don't need debates this year. But if we are having them, I would rather Joe Biden have the better convention rather than the worst one. And we'll see how that continues tonight. Now, Donald Trump next week is planning to do his at the White House. It'll have apparently more of a live feel than the very pre-produced feel that the DNC had, at least on day one. My guess is Trump is going to put together some kind of in-person crowd. That would be my guess. Now, with coronavirus, you've got to be safe. You can't do a big thing. Packing an arena with 20,000 people would be crazy. My idea for the speeches for Bernie and Michelle and Biden, etc., for those speeches, I would have, instead of doing like 30 short segments as they did yesterday, I would have given the keynote people a little more time, but made it higher energy by putting together some small, safe, mask-wearing, socially distant crowds. Outdoors, I'm not saying do anything unsafe, but I think we could have gotten more energy without increasing the risk of coronavirus with some small outdoor crowds. Bernie's crowd in Burlington, that's fine. Michelle's in DC or wherever they're living or at this point, showing the importance of mask wearing, showing the importance of space, but it would have brought a little something, a je ne sais quoi, that was definitely missing yesterday. That would have been my preference. Nothing unsafe. We will see how night 2 goes, and I will be streaming starting about 15 minutes before the start of day 2 tonight on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook, and I hope that you will join me there. Donald Trump received some of his best polling in a while yesterday. There's a major new poll from CNN, which has Joe Biden only 4 points ahead of Donald Trump. With the margin of error, that could mean Trump is now straight up winning. This is one of the closest polls in a while. It's not the only one that says the race is this close, but it should be a huge warning to anybody who thinks Joe Biden has this in the bag, especially if you thought yesterday's first day of the DNC was not so good. Then we have nothing to sit back and be complacent about. If we look at recent national polls, CNN now has Biden only +4, and otherwise it's a bunch of Biden +7, Biden +9, Biden +10, other than a Harris-X poll from a week ago, which agrees it's Biden up by 4. Now, if we look at this CNN poll more closely, you will see that the margin of error is 3.7. Okay, so that means that the poll says this is not speculation. Instead of 50, Biden might only have 46.3. Instead of 46, Trump could have 49.7. So this poll, if you read it correctly and understand the margin of error, the poll says that right now, Trump could be up by 3.4. Now, I don't need to remind you that in 2016, Hillary Clinton had a lead of 3 in the national polls, and she ended up winning by 2 from the standpoint of the popular vote and lost the Electoral College, as Michelle Obama astutely pointed out yesterday. This is a poll which says, forget about whether Biden is up 3 or 4. Trump could be up 3 nationally right now. This poll outlines a better situation for Donald Trump today than he had in November of 2016. Now, it's one poll. The average lead for Biden remains just under 8 points. But why would we take any chance? The polling is looking more and more like it did in 2016. Anyone thinking this is over needs to check the facts. And the facts are that not only is the polling tightening between Biden and Trump, Trump's approval is climbing. I know that when we think about facts and reason, it is crazy to think that this would be going on. But we live in a country where more than 60 million people voted for the guy in 2016. So we have to expect things that make no sense. And if you look at the Gallup Trump approval tracking poll, you see that after a huge drop in approval during the earlier phases of the coronavirus pandemic, Donald Trump's approval has slowly but surely started to creep back up from a low of 38 back in whenever, up to 39, 40, 42. And the trend is pointing further up. Now, we can debate why this is happening. Some people are falling for Trump's BS. They're just falling for it. We have a crazy situation that has been normalized to some degree, and people have gotten used to the pandemic and used to thousands of people dying every single week from coronavirus. There are some people that are just dumb. Okay, well, fine. That's some people. It doesn't matter. That's the thing. They get to vote and we get to vote. Our focus needs to be getting out the vote and making sure that we vote. This is not, if you looked at Biden plus 15 in an outlier poll 6 weeks ago and thought this was going to be easy, this is not going to be easy. This is not going to be easy. 2.5 months to go. We could see anything happen between now and November. Trump teasing he's going to pardon someone major today. Who knows what that is? He mentioned, he said it's not Snowden today, but he's now thinking about, we don't know how different elements of the electorate could react. We have no control over it. We only have control over our voting and talking to other people about the importance of voting. Let me know where you are on this polling issue on Twitter, where you can find me at Pakman. And remember that August 23rd is the 15th anniversary of the David Pakman Show. On that very special day, we will be sending out a coupon code via our newsletter with an insane, possibly illegal, certainly immoral membership discount that you can take advantage of. Just get on our newsletter free at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day who recently signed up at joinpakman.com are Jenny Sebastian and Peter Wells. Jenny and Peter, thank you for your support. And George Sutton is today's longtime sustainer of the day. George has been a member for almost 5 years. Grab a membership. It's quick. It's easy. It supports us at joinpakman.com. Donald Trump this week, as a sort of counter-programming effort to the Democratic National Convention, is traveling each day to different parts of the country. Yesterday, he was in Wisconsin. Today, I believe he's in, Iowa and maybe Arizona. And yesterday, specifically in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, he showed up, did a sort of rally-like event. I covered it live. And Trump simply collapsed once again into authoritarian daydreams, authoritarian nightmares, really, saying he would seek a third term as president because his first term maybe shouldn't count, I guess, because he was spied on, as he claims, even though, of course, that is not the case. Take a look at this insanity and remember, it might be a joke to you and me. We might see this as obviously the rantings of a lunatic, but a lot of his followers agree with this idea.
We are going to win 4 more years. And then after that, we'll go for another 4 years because, you know what, they spied on my campaign. We should get a redo of 4 years.
Now, obviously, it's an insane idea, but Trump got this insane idea from some right-wing commentators who started floating, hey, listen, Trump didn't really get a first term because they spied on him and they impeached him and they did the Russia investigation. Trump heard the idea, so he floats it, and now his followers cheer, and some of them support the idea of a Trump third term. Now, of course, Trump will get no third term, nor will he run for one. But this is how wildly authoritarian stuff spreads, and it is spreading. Some pundit puts it in Trump's brain. Trump, at some point, manic from the crowd, cheering, floats it. And then you've got to start hearing from his followers who say this guy deserves a third term because he didn't really get a first one. Now, everything about this appearance was disturbing. Trump was very manic throughout. It actually got so bad that Trump started talking about trying to win the state of New York in November. It was so crazy that even Fox News had to cut away again. Check it out.
For Republicans, you have to run the whole board because they start off. Now, we're going to play for New York. With all of the crime in New York, I'm going to play for New York.
That was President Trump speaking live in Wisconsin at an airplane hangar, calling it a peaceful protest. Not a traditional campaign rally, really zeroing in on Joe Biden, saying he's bossed around.
Now, Biden is up 24 in New York right now. Trump only has 32% support in New York. There is, of course, no chance that Donald Trump wins New York. Trump can certainly win, and he can win re-election, but Donald Trump is not winning New York. And then Trump absurdly claims that the United States has coronavirus numbers that are better than almost all countries. It's difficult to imagine a less accurate statement. And then Trump says the reason you haven't heard that is because the media, he points to the back of the room always, the media won't tell you that.
They released it. They didn't release it in China, but it came to the United States and Europe, 188 all over the world, 188 countries all over the world. We're not going to forget it. We're not going to forget it. But we're doing great coming back. We're coming back, and our numbers are better than almost all countries. I will tell you that. Despite what you hear, look at all of them up there. Scott, look at all of that fake news. It's unbelievable. Unfortunately, Fox has become fake news, too. I don't know what happens to these people, right? Do you agree?
Trump even turning on Fox News there, which I'm going to talk about more tomorrow, saying Fox is fake news. But that's optics. I care about numbers. Trump said we're better than almost any country on coronavirus. Just as a reminder, we have the 8th most cases per capita and the 10th most deaths per capita out of more than 200 countries and territories. Those are the numbers. Then Trump went back to his terrible reading of a poorly written speech. And with 170,000 dead Americans from coronavirus, Trump says of Joe Biden, Joe was bad on swine flu. Take a listen.
Look at all the fake news. Isn't that incredible? Incredible. It's a lot of fake news back there, Scott. At the end of Joe Biden's 8 years as vice president, nearly 2 million Americans of prime working age had dropped out of the workforce. Our factories were stolen. Our country was doing lousy. He lost nearly 200,000 manufacturing jobs. He was, by the way, a disaster on swine flu. He got a horrible rating in Gallup. Look at the Gallup poll. Look at the Gallup poll. So they call it H1N1, right? Do you remember? H1 swine flu. H1N1. He calls it.
By the way, just to be thorough, out of curiosity, I went and looked at the Obama-Biden approval on swine flu in 2009. About 2/3 of the country approved of the job they did across all regions of the country, across all levels of concern about swine flu. So even there, Trump is wrong on the facts and, of course, is talking about something completely unrelated to what is pressing now, which is 175,000 really dead from coronavirus, with 55,000 additional likely based on looking at excess death data. And then strangely, Donald Trump says Chicago is worse than Syria. That's the argument. I mean, you probably find it odd. But he said Chicago is worse than Syria and Iraq. The context was, of course, bragging about how he militarized our streets.
The drawbridges to prevent hordes of rioters from ransacking the city. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? 17 officers were injured in Chicago. They had a week, a little while ago, during a weekend spree where 78 people were shot and 18 died. That's worse than Afghanistan, which we're getting out of. That's worse than Iraq, which we're almost out of. That's worse than Syria, which we're out of, except we kept the oil, but that's okay. We don't have to talk about that.
Chicago is worse than Syria and Iraq. This is all really bad, but the seeking the third term thing is being weaponized and built up by his most deranged followers. And this is a presidency that is a testament to ignorance. The fact that he received 63 million votes in 2016 when running on things like fixing trade and dealing with China, which he obviously has no clue of, it was a completely obviously unsuited candidate to the job, but 63 million voted for him, and it's a testament to ignorance. The fact that he failed at everything during his presidency, most acutely coronavirus, and is back up to polling 42% in the latest Gallup presidential tracking poll, is a testament to ignorance. And then the fact that he floats something as authoritarian as a third term while sending militarized troops to cities and kneecapping the post office to try to prevent vote by mail, that is a testament to ignorance and to people's own sort of tacit approval or indifference to the authoritarianism they claim to oppose. So we're in real trouble, and we're in trouble as far as the absentee ballots as well. That's what I want to talk about next. As I told you guys some time ago, I requested an absentee ballot in the city of Boston. I requested one for the September 1st primary, and I requested one for the November 3rd general election. And in fact, both my girlfriend and I sent our applications on the same day 2 weeks ago to the city of Boston. What was really weird was that within 5 days, she had her absentee ballot already back and was able to fill it out for the September 1st primary. And I figured, oh, I'm guessing mine will get here the next day. And it didn't. Well, it's probably just one more day. Maybe I missed the day's mail with my ballot and it's going to be delivered to me tomorrow. Boston's really small. 3 miles gets you almost anywhere in the city proper. No big deal. Can't imagine it would be much of a delay. Well, my absentee ballot didn't come in for another day or two. I was away all of last week in the bunker, as many of you remember. I figured my ballot will definitely be waiting for me by the time I get back, right? Got back yesterday, still not here. Started to find it strange. Now we're only 13 days from the actual primary. My girlfriend got hers in 5 days. She's already sent it in. Where's my ballot? I call the city of Boston. City of Boston Elections Department explains, and they say, oh yeah, we got yours today, meaning yesterday, right? August 17th. But I sent it on August 2nd. That's 15 days. And my girlfriend sent hers on the same day. How did my ballot end up delayed 2 weeks when we sent our applications out on the same day? And the woman at Boston Elections says, it's because, here we go now, it's because of what's going on with the post office. 2 items, letters with a single, just a single, didn't have to stamp it, but, just a standard letter, not a package, sent on the same day, could be delivered more than 10 days apart. Now, much the same way, if I get the ballot today or tomorrow and send it, could it again be delayed 14 days? Is that conceivable? If so, that will be after the September 1st primary. Will it still be counted? It's certainly supposed to be counted. But if the city of Boston assumes ballots won't take more than 2 days here in Boston, because again, it's a 3-mile wide city, and then 4 days go by after the primary, maybe they say, let's stop counting now. I can't imagine any more ballots are coming in. So this is truly a mess. And remember, this is all by design, limiting overtime hours so that even though my application and my girlfriend's application probably arrived to be sorted on the same day, if you prevent overtime, you prevent sorting, which prevents the ballot from being handed to the carrier, which delays delivery. And in this case, it delays processing. This is no joke. And if this is happening in Massachusetts, just imagine what is going on in places with inferior social services and inferior infrastructure in general. So needless to say, my plan is to drive my ballot to City Hall in the next few days, assuming it comes in today or tomorrow. Now, will this lead to protests? Because they actually seem warranted. This is a major direct attack on the democratic systems we thought we had at their core. People emailing me saying, David, I looked up my ballot. The online system says my ballot was sent 10 days ago. Haven't received it. My town's even smaller than Boston. It's 2 miles wide or whatever. I hate to say it, but to have more certainty that your vote will be counted, you might have to vote in person. And given the pandemic, that's horrible. And everybody needs to figure out what's best for them. What level of risk are you willing to tolerate? I wish I had better news, but I don't. We're going to have more coverage of this on our Instagram page, David Pakman Show, all one word on Instagram. While you're there, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. We'll take a quick break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today I'm welcoming to the program Barbara Fries, who's an environmental attorney, energy analyst, and author of the recently released book, Industrial Strength Denial: 8 Stories of Corporations Defending the Indefensible from the Slave Trade to Climate Change. Barbara, it's great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me, David.
So this is a theme, this idea of denial. It's a strategy, really. And whenever there is a disagreement in culture, in politics, wherever, sometimes the facts are debated, but sometimes you see a strategy of simply denying the facts, saying those are not the facts, or I don't believe what you are presenting me, sort of an equivalent to burying one's head in the sand, as it may be. How far back does the sort of grift of denial go as you've charted and researched it?
Well, I went back as far as the slave trade and a challenge to it in Britain in the late 1700s and early 1800s. I do think of this as a part of human psychology, so I think it goes back as long as we've been humans. But as far as a documented industry campaign of denial, we know that it's at least as old as the slave trade.
And what were the arguments made around the slave trade?
They were appalling and absurd. They basically embraced this kind of rescue narrative that they were not, enslaving people. They weren't taking captives from Africa and putting them on horrible plantations. On the contrary, they were rescuing them from a worse fate in Africa, where they would have been put to death as prisoners of war or eaten by cannibals, and delivering them to, first of all, on a lovely festive slave ship, to a very comfortable plantation where they would be well treated and have comfortable homes and be taken care of in old age and sickness. And it was really appalling. And because this was the British trade and the British dominated the trade, they were speaking to an audience that had no direct experience at all of slavery. So they could really get away with some whoppers that they couldn't have gotten away with in the United States, where people at least saw something of slavery.
I've even heard in the last few years that typically from folks from certain political persuasions in the United States, I'm not for slavery, but conditions for some freed slaves were worse than with certain slave owners, which seems sort of like a similar idea.
Well, and in fact, that was a strategy that the British slave traders used. They frequently compared the conditions that slaves lived under with the poor in Britain. And of course, the poor in Britain did live under terrible conditions. So it was sort of an example of sort of this downward ratchet, that as long as there were bad conditions for one group, you could use that as an excuse to allow even worse conditions for another group.
Very present right now when we talk about denial is climate science and climate science denial. And you write about this in the book. I've been covering it for a very long time. Is there something unique to climate science denial, maybe either from a psychological perspective or in some way that distinguishes it from the other denial grifts that you've covered? Or is it just another version of the same sort of thing?
Well, pretty much all the climate denials that we see have appeared in other industries over the decades and centuries. But there are some things about climate denial that I think make it just particularly easy. One of them is that it is such a huge problem. It is such a long-term problem. It is something that everybody contributes to at least a little bit in terms of consuming fossil fuels. And that's such a familiar thing that our minds are not really triggered to be afraid of things that are that familiar. And another thing I think that makes this unusual is just the phenomenal success of climate denial. I mean, you never heard presidents of the United States, at least in the modern era, denying that tobacco caused cancer. But you have heard at least one of them calling climate change a hoax.
Yeah, that's interesting because some of the same people, one of the phenomena that I find interesting about the climate issue is we know what the science is and we know it's overwhelming. And at this point, it's like almost a cliche to repeat it time and time again. But the people that deny it seem to accept uncritically the claims of some small sliver of scientists they can find, or they in other words, they seem to not apply the same critiques to those that happen to share their pre-existing notion. And I've not found a good way to break through that kind of epistemological barrier when I talk to those people.
Right. One of the things I write about in the book is basically tribalism and its effect on the mind and how easily triggered it is, and then how incredibly powerful it is. So in times of uncertainty, in times of conflict, it becomes particularly strong, and certainly the level of skepticism you would apply to people outside your tribe becomes very, very high, and the level of skepticism you apply to those within your tribe telling you what you want to hear is very, very low. It's also a sort of exaggerated confirmation bias that we all indulge in personally, but that gets amplified in times like this when the issue is this big and when the industry in question is really, one of the most, or maybe the most powerful industry in the world, and where you're talking about harms that are really inherent in its central product. In that sense, it's kind of like tobacco. Interestingly, the big oil companies now, just like big tobacco, don't deny anymore the fundamental facts of their product causing harm. And yet they have been denying it for so many decades and put in place so many barriers to regulation that they're still benefiting from the decades of denial past.
What seems to be effective in getting through the denial? I mean, I'm thinking of, with coronavirus as an example, initially when there were some cases in China, it was very easy to just say it won't come here. And then it did. And it's very easy to say there won't be a lot of cases and they'll go away. And then there's lots of cases, but you say, well, we're not going to have a lot of deaths. And then there's deaths. And then people will say, listen, I'm hearing that people are dying, but I'm not seeing the bodies. And then you see the news video of the mass graves being dug and the refrigerated trucks. And people say that's optics produced to trick people for political reasons. Like there's always that ability to say it's stage managed, it's fake, whatever. What is effective at getting past all of that?
I wish I could give you a formula that made it clear what's effective. It does seem to matter to have facts and to have imagery and to bring that before the public. What tends to be most effective in overcoming denial is for there to no longer be any real credible benefit to denial. So, for example, that's, I think, what brought the tobacco industry finally into, the modern era, because it was to the point where nobody believed them anyway, and they were being sued for fraud, and they had all kinds of other problems. And they realized that admitting that their product killed people wasn't really going to prevent them from selling it, even after decades of saying if this was true, we'd stop selling it. So that tends to be what happens. I'd like to imagine that eventually, when it comes to larger efforts to overcome denial, if you think of us as being very tribal and taking on kind of a herd mentality, then perhaps when people who are at the head of the herd switch, it might lead to some greater acceptance. You might look at the George Floyd protests, which isn't really the same thing, but you had the video of his killing.
Right.
And I think that helped a lot of members of the public who had no financial or ideological stake in this one way or another, but except that they wanted to believe the world was, better than it is. When they saw that, I think a certain amount of public denial about just how bad things could be went away. So I do tend to be a big believer in evidence and trying to bring that out there, even though we do have a lot of examples of it failing to convince people.
How much of a problem do you see the corporate media coverage of some of these issues being? And the example I'm thinking of is, although the science on climate is, 99.98 to 0.02 or however lopsided it is you want to claim it is, it's somewhere in that range. You have numerous and regular corporate media debates where you have two people and they're given equal time, and one person, 50% of the debate represents the 99.98, and 50% of the debate, meaning one person, represents the 0.02. It's this sort of false balance problem, which I think corporate media engages in order to be neutral, as they say. But neutral is not objective. And so I'm wondering how much you think that contributes to some of this denial and provides cover.
Yeah, I think that has always been a problem when it comes to particularly climate change. I mean, even if you were to try to do it in some more balanced way, and for example, you were to have a debate with 99 climate scientists who recognized the threat and one who denied it, I think that the audience would still come away saying, oh, well, then there are two different opinions. So I think you're right that pretty much any attention to what is now a very much discredited viewpoint gives it more credibility with the public, and particularly with the public that is not scientific and not fully aware of all the data, because you can never really convey all the data or the strength of it to a non-scientific public.
When it comes to something like coal, which relates to the climate debate more generally, in that certainly, if you disbelieve the science on climate, you might be more supportive of coal because of its immediate sort of monetary benefits in that it's cheap and we don't need new infrastructure like we would with solar or wind or whatever the case may be. How have you seen or sort of observed the coal debate happen during the current administration, where we've seen the president essentially say that he wants to take this out of the market, the free market, of course, pointing to letting coal die to revitalize an industry that from a climate perspective doesn't make sense. Where does this fit into the discussion in terms of people who say, yeah, we really should bring coal back? Is it a denial of the climate science? Is it a sort of political or tribal-based reaction, some combination of the two?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a combination of the two, and it's certainly a reflection of the fact that to the extent the coal industry has been defending itself in the past by saying that you should let the market decide,
right.
That sort of ideological justification for burning coal really wasn't what was ever motivating them. And in fact, what the president has tried to do is to get power companies to buy coal and subsidize coal, even when they would prefer not to. So that was a pretty clear illustration that the ideological justification was never really what was driving it.
The last thing I want to touch on is, I think if we didn't mention this, we would be missing a huge piece of this, which is the denial side is often very well funded. And when you think back to tobacco, and I forget if it was the Clean Skies or Clean Air Initiative or whatever, which was basically about convincing restaurant owners, hey, if you want freedom from regulation, we need you on board so that people will be allowed to smoke inside your restaurants when the movement for no smoking in restaurants started. These are really well-funded movements, and that seems to dramatically skew a lot of the conversations that are happening, does it not?
Oh, sure. I mean, the industries that I wrote about, and I focused just on 8 industries, and most of them really big ones, they had enormous amounts of money to promote their viewpoint, to give to other sort of free market ideological groups to promote their views more secretly, to hire people to write articles, but not to explain where they got the money. And then ultimately you end up with an entire industry that supports other industries that are trying to deny the science. So you've got the law firms, the PR firms, the advertising agencies, and the so-called nonprofits that become advocates to oppose regulation. So, I try to write about this partly from a kind of psychological perspective, looking at the social science. And I think what happens is that for the individuals in the corporations that confront these charges, that there is a very natural, instinctive inclination to deny it, which is just part of human nature. I think it then moves pretty quickly into a corporate strategy, and then it moves from there into its own kind of a denial industry with the same PR firms and others appearing again and again. And then I think it moves into an ideology. And so it's that progression that makes denial this very human thing, but promoted by these very powerful institutions, such a destructive thing.
Do you have any insights into the psychology of the cogs in the wheel, so to speak, that are carrying out a lot of these denial campaigns? Because I could imagine a situation where the people working at the PR firm or the people working at a corporation or the law firm at the individual level, many of them probably know that what they're doing is lying and that they're denying what are the facts. Is it as simple as, listen, I'm a cog in the wheel, I'm just trying to put food on the table, and this is going to happen regardless? Or have you had any insights into that at the individual level?
I think that is definitely part of it. And corporations themselves, especially the big ones, certainly the big ones, are designed to make the individual not feel responsible for what the corporation does. It does that through division of labor. You're just a cog in a wheel, and we know for sure that diminishes your feelings of responsibility for the consequences. You've got management divided from ownership. You've got this ideology that tells managers that their only responsibility is to maximize shareholder profit. Meanwhile, shareholders don't feel responsible because they're far away. It's transactional. They may just own the stock for a little while and they don't know what's going on anyway. We also know that power tends to focus the mind on your most salient goals, which if you're a corporate executive is profit. It also, there's some evidence, seems to reduce your risk awareness and your risk perception once you become aware of it, and your general social responsibility. Again, there's the tribalism, the competitiveness inherent in corporations, the market mindset. So yeah, there are a lot of psychological things that you could point to. In fact, I suggest in the book that if you are a supervillain trying to get the world to destroy itself by taking crazy risks, you might just create a society very much like our corporate-dominated market society, because there are many, many things there that undermine our innate sense of social responsibility.
Very well said. The book is Industrial Strength Denial: 8 Stories of Corporations Defending the Indefensible from the Slave Trade to Climate Change. We've been speaking with the book's author, Barbara Fries. Barbara, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Dr. Anthony Fauci is at least partially blaming Fox News host Tucker Carlson's comments about him for the threats that he and his family have been receiving. And this is another really great opportunity to revisit the concept of stochastic terrorism, which sadly, shockingly, is quite prevalent during the Trump administration. Now, you might recall that we learned a few weeks, months ago about threats against Dr. Anthony Fauci, which is crazy. Usually we listen to doctors during pandemics. In the United States, they need security. And the threats have in fact gotten so bad that even Dr. Fauci's family, including his daughters, are needing security now. I talked about that last week or the week before. Well, Tucker Carlson has been saying anti-Fauci things for some time, saying that Dr. Fauci is, quote, an oily Politician on an ego trip. Tucker claimed masks don't do anything. Tucker's against shutdowns. Tucker has claimed he should be a trucker rather than a Fox News host. I think we'd get actually a lot more value given the importance of trucking rather than him seeding the country with bad information. He could be participating in delivering key supplies. But no, I meant Tucker, not trucker. Claiming Dr. Fauci has been, quote, enjoying himself during the pandemic, and on and on and on. Carlson also claimed that the policies Dr. Fauci was recommending were national suicide. It's a very long list. Dr. Fauci was asked about it. He was interviewed by the Washington Post recently. And Dr. Fauci said, quote, I'm not concerned about what Carlson says. I think you could say that when he does that, meaning talk about Fauci, it triggers some of the crazies in society to start threatening me, actually threatening, which actually happens. Who would have thought when I was in medical school doing things to save people's lives, I'd have to be going around with a security detail? That's really ridiculous. Yeah, it does trigger people when Tucker Carlson makes Dr. Anthony Fauci the target of his attacks. And the relevant term is one I've used before. It's stochastic terrorism. People often ask, how do you spell it? That's STOCH, stochastic terrorism. This type of rhetoric on Fox News can have a real world impact. We already see the real world impact in that Dr. Fauci and his family now need security, but it could lead to an actual acute incident, if you understand what I'm saying. Now, of course, Tucker Carlson wouldn't be legally liable, even if it was proven that someone attacked Fauci and got the idea from watching Tucker Carlson. Why? Well, number one, Tucker isn't saying go attack Dr. Fauci. But number two, when we say stochastic terrorism, we're talking about the idea that given a large enough audience, it starts to become mathematically likely that someone will be moved to action by the things that you say on the show, right? So let's take something very benign. If I on the show every day say it's really important that people vote this election, no matter what. If my audience is 10 people, it's not super likely someone is going to go and vote who otherwise wouldn't have because of me. If my audience is 100 people, it starts to become more likely I will have influenced someone to go and to vote who otherwise wouldn't. If my audience is 100,000, it's now mathematically very likely that by suggesting people vote, I will have influenced someone. So let's apply it to these situations. Imagine that there's a really small chance that Tucker would be able to get an individual viewer in his audience to go and try to kill Dr. Fauci. Imagine that the possibility of that is 0.00001% or something like that. If Tucker's audience is 10 people, it's extremely unlikely with such a small percentage that anybody is going to hear Tucker and go and attack Dr. Fauci. When the audience is 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000, millions of views on YouTube, it's still not going to be many people, but the probability that one person goes and tries to harm Dr. Fauci based on what they heard on Tucker Carlson's show starts to become greater than one. It's likely to actually affect at least one person. And as you can see, once the audience is big enough, the irresponsible suggestion that I could make or that Tucker Carlson could make or whatever starts to be likely to have a real world impact. We saw it with Glenn Beck and the Tides Foundation years ago, where Glenn Beck was ranting and raving. I think at the time he was on Fox News about the Tides Foundation. And an armed guy was actually pulled over. I believe it was on the California highway on his way to attack or bomb or do something to the Tides Foundation. Now, of course, Glenn Beck was not legally liable, but the guy said, I got the idea that the Tides Foundation needs to be dealt with from Glenn Beck. Is it easy to say, well, that's clearly somebody who's mentally disturbed? Normal people wouldn't do that. Sure. But the point is, this stuff really matters. And for everybody who says merely free speech and freedom of the press and all of that, yeah, that's right. No one's denying Tucker has the right to say things about Dr. Fauci, the same way that I have the right to say people should go and vote. What I'm saying is you have to use your speech responsibly, and you have to understand that when you start throwing violent attention on a doctor trying to deal with the pandemic, you place a target on that individual. You're throwing gasoline on the fire, quite simply. And it's not about limiting speech. That's not at all what this is about. It's about recognizing that we have to use our platforms responsibly. And of course, it's not just Tucker, right? I mean, if the country were more educated, if the country less easily fell for anti-science nonsense, Tucker would be yelling into an empty well. But unfortunately, the American right is a particularly receptive audience for anti-science nonsense. There are a series of bills popping up in a bunch of states that would criminalize and repress protests of all types. And this is really chilling, red alert, authoritarian type stuff. In Nashville, Tennessee, lawmakers have put together a bill, 8005, that's Senate bill and House bill 8005, already passed the legislature, would make it a Class E felony to camp on state or public property between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Now, what's the idea there? The idea is have carte blanche, have a blank slate to go after protests that will occupy a plaza for some time or a park for some time. Once 10 p.m. comes, Class C felony, start arresting everybody. They are threatening convictions, punishable by up to 6 years in prison and the possible loss of your voting rights. It makes it easier to charge protesters with theft if they mark up state buildings with chalk. A Michigan bill will classify rioting as terrorism. Now, what's the problem there? The line on rioting is in and of itself up for debate. This would make anything that you can call rioting, even if it's not, terrorism. It would make acts of, quote, social and domestic anarchy punishable by up to 20 years in prison or a $250,000 fine. In South Dakota, the governor signed into law stricter penalties for rioting and inciting a riot. Now, inciting a riot is pernicious since animated protesting could conceivably look like it incited someone to start rioting. And that's a really broad catch-all that is being applied there. In Louisiana, there's a bill on the table which could mean 15 years in prison for protesting, quote, on critical infrastructure. What's the idea there? To repress protests near a pipeline that residents in Louisiana oppose. Now, there are many more examples. More than 20 states over the last couple of years have proposed some of these types of bills. The idea is sometimes to criminalize homelessness. Sometimes it's to criminalize protesting. Other times it's to restrict speech in practice, although they claim that's not what they're doing in theory. And this is the stuff that reminds us why we need to vote at every level. It's not just presidential, but we need state senates, state legislatures, governorships, because those are the origins of a lot of these bills. And those are people choosing many of the state judges that might eventually decide on the legality of some of these authoritarian restrictions on protesting. Authoritarianism really does not like protesting. We know that from history. Now, I think it's also important to remember that this is not just about new laws. You can weaponize existing laws as well, which is why we need the right mayors and police chiefs in place. Mayors often choosing police chiefs because they can take advantage of existing curfew laws. They can focus on unlawful assembly angles, on gatherings, and on and on. So it's not just about state legislatures, state senates, and governors. We need the right mayors. We need to push them to select the right police chiefs. This is much more than the presidency. By the way, it's also really weird and, of course, completely hypocritical that many of the same people stockpiling weapons in case the government were to become tyrannical are in support of laws cracking down on unarmed protesters and are saying, well, if the gatherings are against the law, these protesters should find some other way to request redress of their grievances. What? Things are completely backwards, of course, and this is just the latest. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting question about a word I've been using lately. Take a listen.
Hi, David. This is Mike from Washington State. I was wondering if you could answer a question for me. I hear you occasionally refer to Trump supporters as sycophants or sycophants. I'm not really sure what that means or what that. I kind of know what it means, but I don't really know what you're saying. Is it sick of fans or
No.
sycophants or, I'm not really sure what that term is being said there. So if you could clear that up for me, I'd appreciate it. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, so the term is sycophant, okay? It's sycophant. A sycophant is someone who acts obsequiously towards someone important in order to gain advantage or gain perceived advantage. What does obsequious mean? Obsequious is to be obedient or attentive to an excessive or servile degree. So when we talk about Trump sycophants, we're talking about the people who will go with anything Trump says. Trump says, I deserve a third term because my first one, I had to deal with impeachment. They go with it. They are completely non-discriminating in terms of what they will agree with Trump on. And they do it in order to gain some perceived advantage. Either it's we want Trump to like us, or it's to be part of the in crowd, or it's because what our family and friends expect us to do, or whatever the case may be. So the word is sycophant. And often I like to sort of dress it up by calling them brown-nosing sycophants, but maybe that's a topic for another day. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Donald Trump is now lashing out at New Zealand's coronavirus response on a day when New Zealand had 9 coronavirus cases. We're going to talk about New Zealand because it's very interesting what's going on there. We also have reported 130-degree temperatures in Death Valley, potentially record temperatures coming in Death Valley. And in California, more than 3 million homes could lose power. I will tell you why and what's going on, and we'll talk about energy, solar, and much, much more. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today. Get instant access to it 2 ways. Become a member at joinpakman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I'll see you then. Thanks so much for watching today's full episode of the show. Just a reminder, today's sponsor is Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist for free and save 25% off of a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've also included the link right underneath this video.